Did the international community meet its obligation with respect to Aleppo? To answer this question, we need to look at the background of the Syrian war. The Syrian civil war is a vexed issue that initially began as a conflict between the long-serving Assad government and citizens opposed to the regime. Anti-government protests culminated into nationwide unrest and violence in 2011. Hundreds of rebel groups formed to battle government forces, which then became more complex when these groups included jihadist factions such as Islamic State, which then added a further violent dimension. The conflict became more complex as global parties became involved, such as Russia, who have a vested interest in Syria and thus wish to appease the Assad government. The civil war has permeated into 2017. Amid these years, more than 300,000 people have died and 5 million people, most of them being women and children, have fled Syria, according to the UN. Thus, the war has become synonymous with being one of the largest refugee exoduses in recent history. Do the international community even have an obligation with respect to Aleppo? Syria's civil war has aptly been named a humanitarian crisis, and if the answer to this question of an obligation is yes, then what does it consist of? Is it to militarily intervene for support on the ground, support the Assad government in attempts to stabilise the nation, ensure the delivery of food and medical supplies, provide safe passage out of the war zone, or provide asylum? This question of obligation rests primarily on the balance between intervention and the responsibility to protect R2P and the principle of nation-state sovereignty. What is sovereignty? Sovereignty provides a principle in which matters both internal and external to states can be concurrently ordered. It assumes a ruling system that is universal and mandatory in relation to the citizens of a specific territory, whilst excluding all non-citizens. A sovereign state is a political organisation with the capacity within a certain territory to make and enforce laws, apply a monopoly over disposing violence, and control policy and government. As a global concept, sovereignty is understood and shaped by an understanding of R2P. What is R2P? R2P is a security and human rights norm that was established in 2005 United Nations World Summit in order to address the failure of the international community to combat genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. R2P has three pillars. Firstly, the state itself has primary responsibility to protect their population from these grievances. Secondly, the international community has a responsibility to encourage and assist the state in doing so. Lastly, and most crucially, the international community is tasked with the responsibility to protect these populations when the state is manifestly failing and are obligated to take collective action to do so. Thus, R2P redefines sovereignty in that it places responsibility on the state to protect its own citizens without interference, however transfers this responsibility to the international community if the state itself is the perpetrator of the atrocities. This reconceptualization of state sovereignty as having a responsibility to protect rather than a sole right to autonomy demonstrates how the failed state does not deserve sovereignty and is subject to intervention to rebuild a state that would deserve the recognition of sovereignty. So in coming back to the crucial question posed here regarding whether the international community met its obligations regarding Aleppo. Considering the fact that over 300,000 people have died thus far, the simple answer is no. The fact that the war has not yet ended is reflective of the inaction of the international community and their failings in protecting the population of Aleppo. A complex web of differing contested global interests, particularly within the UN Security Council, characterises this inaction, and it is difficult to imagine how the international community could find a means to intersect in their seemingly divergent priorities. The crucial point to make here is that although R2P obliges action upon state failings, at a base level it appears the international community respects the sovereignty of Syria more than the lives of innocent civilians at stake in this war. As a result of this, several non-government organisations and charities have had to compensate for state inaction in order to combat the atrocities and human rights violations being committed in Syria. A variety of organisations have taken upon this responsibility. Firstly, UNICEF and its partners reached 2.9 million people with urgent assistance, including 350,000 in besieged and hard-to-access areas. Secondly, World Vision's Syria Response Initiative reached approximately 2.3 million people, including 1.18 million children inside Syria and in the nearby countries that are hosting most Syrian refugees, including Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, and Iraq. They did this by helping people access food, clean water, sanitation and hygiene services, providing shelter and emergency supplies such as blankets and warm winter clothing, as well as safe spaces for children to learn, play, and receive other forms of support. Thirdly, the United Nations Refugee Agency provided emergency supplies, as well as support and assistance to refugee families. Other organisations are also taking on this responsibility, such as the White Helmets, who visit scenes of bombings to save those trapped in the rubble or injured by the blast, saving 73,530 lives since 2013. Doctors Without Borders, Islamic Relief USA, International Committee of the Red Cross, the International Rescue Committee, and many others. Overall, it is apparent that the international community did not meet its obligations with respect to Aleppo, specifically in regards to their responsibility to protect. Instead, NGOs and charities have had to take on this responsibility themselves in order to address the human rights violations and crimes against humanity committed in the Syrian civil war.